The transport ship broke through the thick clouds like a silver blade cutting the sky. Inside, Commander Vrotha stood tall, his black armor scarred from battles across 100 worlds. His eyes cold and sharp like the edge of a sword scanned the readouts on the screen. The planet below was called Erebostri, a human colony that had been at the center of one of the bloodiest wars in the galaxy. Vrotha had seen many battlefields. He had fought in the siege of Arklan, where even mountains had been turned to dust. He had fought on the burning seas of Kalshur, where ships sank in molten waves. But this planet was different. It was the last place in the galaxy where humans had resisted until the very end. The hatch opened with a hiss, and cold wind rushed in. Vrotha stepped down onto cracked ground. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though the war had ended months ago. Buildings stood half destroyed, their walls blackened with burn marks. Streets were littered with twisted metal and shattered glass. And yet, life moved. Humans walked through the rubble, carrying tools, building walls, repairing what had been destroyed. Children ran across the broken streets, chasing a ball made from scraps of cloth. A woman laughed as she passed by, balancing a basket of metal parts on her head. Vrotha slowed his steps, his long shadow stretching across the ruins. This was not what he expected. When he had heard the war reports, the humans were described as a fragile species. Their bodies were weaker than most alien races. Their technology was outdated compared to the fleets of the Galactic Alliance. They should have broken under the weight of war. And yet, here they were still standing. A voice called out from behind him. "You're not from here, are you?" Vrotha turned. A man stood leaning on a metal crutch. His uniform was torn, the left sleeve pinned where an arm used to be. Despite the wounds, his eyes were bright and sharp. "I am Commander Vrotha of the Valari Guard," the alien said, his deep voice echoing off the broken walls. The man smiled faintly. "Captain Reeves, 3rd Infantry, or what's left of it." He stepped forward, his limp steady, almost practiced. "You came to see the war's aftermath, didn't you?" Vrotha nodded once. "I have fought many battles, but I wanted to see for myself how your kind survived here. Our reports," he paused, searching for the right word, "did not match what I am seeing." Reeves chuckled, though it was a dry, tired sound. "Reports don't tell you the whole story. They can't. You can only understand it if you hear it from someone who was here." Something in the human's tone made Vrotha pause. There was no arrogance, no pride, only a strange, calm certainty. Reeves gestured to the side. "Come with me, I'll tell you what happened." They walked together through the ruins. Vrotha's heavy boots crunched over debris while Reeves moved with surprising speed despite his injuries. They passed a group of men welding a broken vehicle back together. Sparks flew in the air. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, waved at Vrotha before running off, laughing. "These people," Vrotha muttered. "They act as though the war never happened." Reeves shook his head. "Oh, the war happened, and it nearly ended us. But you'd be surprised how much a human can take before breaking. We don't just fight the enemy, we fight everything." They've reached the remains of a large building. The roof was gone, and the walls were pocked with holes. Inside, a few humans worked, sorting through boxes and repairing equipment. Reeves stopped, leaning against the doorframe. "This was our command post during the siege," he said quietly. "We held this place for months after the rest of the planet fell. We had no supply drops, no reinforcements, just what we could. Salvage from the dead and the ruins, Vrotha's brow furrowed. How many soldiers? Reeves looked up at him. 82 at the start. By the end, 12. Vrotha's chest tightened. Even in his longest campaigns, he had never fought under such desperate odds. How did you? Reeves cut him off with a small smile. You'll understand soon enough. He pointed toward the back of the ruined building, where a narrow tunnel led underground. It started down there. The day we realized the war wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about surviving the impossible. Vrotha hesitated. At the mouth of the tunnel, the air coming from below was cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of oil and smoke. He glanced at Reeves, who was already moving inside. Something told him that whatever he learned down there would not only change his view of humanity, it might haunt him for the rest of his life. With a slow, heavy breath, Commander Vrotha followed the human captain into the darkness. The tunnel walls were made of scavenged metal plates, stitched together with bolts and welding marks. Water dripped from somewhere above, echoing in the silence. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until the only light came from flickering lamps hanging by thin wires. Commander Vrotha had walked through many war bunkers in his life, but this one felt different. It was not built for comfort or even safety. It was built to keep people alive, no matter the cost. Reeves stopped at a narrow chamber. The floor was covered in old sleeping bags, worn blankets, and crates stacked high with rusted cans. The air smelled faintly of smoke, fuel, and something else Vrotha recognized instantly: burned protein rations. This is where we lived, Reeves said, running a hand along the cold wall. Weeks turned into months. We couldn't go above ground without being spotted by the enemy drones, so we dug every day, deeper and farther. Vrotha frowned. How did you eat? You had no supply ships. Reeves chuckled without humor. We made do with what we had. Old military rations. Anything we could salvage from abandoned houses. When that ran out, he paused, his voice growing quieter. We ate roots from the surface plants. We boiled them until they stopped, making us sick. The alien warrior's stomach twisted. On his homeworld, even his people's toughest soldiers would have surrendered long before resorting to such measures. Reeves kept walking, leading Vrotha deeper into the tunnels. They passed a small room filled with broken weapons, stripped down for spare parts. Another chamber had crude water filters made from sand, cloth, and metal drums. You were fighting a war, and building all this at the same time? Vrotha asked, his voice low. Reeves nodded. We had no choice. The enemy wanted us to starve, to give up. But every day we lasted was another day they wasted resources trying to break us. And humans, well, we don't like being told when to die. They reached a heavy steel door at the end of the tunnel. Reeves placed his hand against it. This, he said slowly, was the worst day of the siege. The door groaned open, revealing a large underground hall. In the center, a cracked metal table still stood, surrounded by broken chairs. The walls were covered with maps, scribbled notes, and crude drawings made by children. In the far corner lay a pile of dented helmets, some human, some alien. Reeves stepped toward the table. We had been under siege for 3 months. Food was gone. Ammunition was almost gone. The enemy sent a message: surrender, or they would burn the entire colony from orbit. Vrotha's eyes narrowed. And you refused? Reeves gave a small nod. Of course we refused. We had families here, children, and we knew if we surrendered, they'd be slaughtered anyway. He looked down at the table, his hand resting on its edge. That night, 20 of our people volunteered to go topside. They went to raid an enemy supply post. Everyone knew it was suicide. But they went anyway, so the rest of us could have one more week of food, one more week to fight. Rother's gaze moved to the pile of helmets. There were exactly 20 human helmets lying there, each one burned, cracked, or marked with deep cuts. They never came back, Reeves said softly. But they gave us enough supplies to last another month. And that month changed everything. Rother felt a strange heaviness in his chest. In his own army, soldiers fought for victory, for glory. But these humans, they fought for each other, even if it meant dying with no recognition. The alien commander stepped closer to the table, his voice low. Your people, they are not fragile. They are something else entirely. Reeves gave him a long, unreadable look. You haven't heard the half of it yet. What happened after that? He shook his head. That's when the real nightmare began. Rother said nothing. But inside, he felt something he had not felt in years, a deep, unsettled respect. Reeves led Rother out of the tunnel network and toward the far edge of the ruined colony. The air grew colder with each step, and the ground shifted from dust to hard, pale frost. In the distance, the sun hung low, its light weak and pale, against a sky heavy with grey clouds. This place wasn't always frozen, Reeves said quietly as they walked. When the orbital strikes hit, they cracked the moon's surface. The atmosphere changed, the temperature dropped fast. In a matter of weeks, it became a frozen wasteland. They reached a ridge of shattered ice. Jagged spires jutted from the ground like the teeth of some ancient beast. A deep crevasse split the land ahead, its depths swallowing the light. Reeves stopped at the edge and stared down. This is where we made our last stand, he said. Rother peered into the abyss. The ice walls glistened in strange patterns, almost like scars. He could see faint tunnels carved through the frozen walls, twisting and turning like veins. When the cold came, Reeves continued, we couldn't stay in the open. Our bodies would have frozen in hours. So we moved underground into the ice itself. We dug with whatever we had, metal scraps, bare hands. Some froze before they could even finish their tunnels. Rother's claws curled slightly. And the enemy followed you here? Reeves nodded. They tried. But the ice became our weapon. We set traps in the tunnels, melted sections so they'd collapse under enemy weight, buried explosives deep enough to make the ground crack open. Every inch of ice became a battlefield. He stepped closer to the edge and pointed to a dark hole halfway down the wall. That was where it happened. The night we lost 20 men. In one storm, the alien warrior's gaze followed the point. What kind of storm? Reeves's jaw tightened. The kind you don't walk away from. Temperatures dropped so low, the metal in our rifles froze solid. The wind screamed so loud you couldn't hear your own thoughts. Ice needles cut through clothing and skin like knives. He paused, and for a moment his eyes seemed far away. They went out anyway because a group of civilians was trapped on the other side of the ridge. Rother tilted his head. They knew they wouldn't survive. Reeves nodded once. We all knew, but that's the thing about humans. Sometimes we'd rather die trying than live knowing we didn't. He crouched, scooping up a chunk of ice from the ground. We found them days later, frozen together. One man still holding the little boy he'd carried through the storm. Rother said nothing. His breath came out as a cloud in the cold air. Something in the human's words pressed against the edge of his mind. unsettling him in ways battlefields never had. Reeves stood again and looked out over the frozen wasteland. After that night, the enemy thought we'd finally be broken. But they didn't understand. Every loss just made us fight harder. We weren't just holding the colony anymore. We were holding our people's last chance to exist here. The alien commander's eyes scanned the ice once more. It was more than just frozen. Water, it was a graveyard. And yet, somehow, it had also been a shield. Reeves turned toward him. You wanted to know how we survived. This was part of it. We learned to fight in places no one else could. We made the cold our ally, and when the enemy thought they'd crushed us, we were already digging our way back into the fight. Vrothar's voice was low, almost thoughtful. I have fought in deserts, in jungles, in burning seas, but never in a place that would kill you, even if no enemy fired a shot. Reeves gave him a thin smile. That's the thing, Commander. Out here, the environment was just as much the enemy as the army trying to wipe us out. But we didn't give up. Not then, not ever. A sharp gust of wind howled over the ridge, carrying with it the deep, hollow groan of shifting ice. Vrothar glanced toward the sound and felt a strange, unfamiliar shiver, not from the cold, but from the quiet realization that this fragile species might be the most dangerous opponent he'd ever met. Reeves turned and began walking back toward the colony. Come on, he said. You've seen the ice. Now it's time you heard about the fire. Vrothar followed, his heavy footsteps crunching in the frost. Somewhere deep inside, the first cracks were forming in his old beliefs. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't fragile. Humanity endured. The wind faded as they returned to the heart of the colony. Smoke rose from chimneys built into the sides of broken buildings. Sparks danced from welders' torches as humans repaired old vehicles and rebuilt shattered walls. Every sound, the hammering, the laughter, the clinking of metal, was a reminder that life still refused to die here. Reeves stopped before what had once been the main city square. The ground was blackened and cracked, with deep scorch marks, radiating outward like the petals of some dark flower. In the center stood a single twisted flagpole, the fabric burned away long ago. This, Reeves said, his voice low, is where we made our last stand. Vrothar stepped forward, his boots crunching on shards of glass. He imagined the square filled with soldiers, weapons ready, the air thick with smoke and fear. They came at us with everything, Reeves continued. Gunships, tanks, infantry, an orbital fire to finish the job. We had maybe 50 fighters left. Farmers, engineers, medics, anyone who could hold a weapon. The alien commander's brow furrowed, and you stayed. Reeves gave a small, almost amused smile. We weren't staying for glory, Commander. We were staying so the evacuation ships could get off the ground. Every second we held the square was another second for our people to escape. He pointed toward the jagged skyline. We turned the ruins into traps, collapsed buildings to block their advance, rigged fuel tanks to explode when they got too close. We fought until the barrels of our rifles were too hot to touch. Vrothar's mind painted the scene, humans fighting in smoke-choked streets, explosions tearing through the enemy ranks, the smell of burning metal and ozone filling the air. It was not an army fighting for conquest. It was a species refusing to vanish. They hit us from above, Reeves said, his tone sharpening. Orbital fire tore through the city. Entire blocks went up in flames. And you know what happened? Vrothar shook his head. People who had lost everything, Homes, families ran toward the fight. Civilians, commander, people who'd never held a rifle. They carried ammunition. They dragged the wounded to safety. They took over machine guns when soldiers fell. The alien felt something twist inside him. In his own military, civilians were liabilities. Here, they were warriors. One moment I'll never forget, Reeves said, his eyes narrowing. We had an old cargo hauler barely holding together. Our engineers stuffed it with explosives, welded the doors shut, and pointed it straight at the enemy's heaviest armor. A farmer drove it, didn't even slow down when they opened fire, took out half their forward line. Vrother could almost hear the roar of the blast, feel the shockwave in his chest. His claws flexed unconsciously. This was not the kind of war story he was used to. Hearing it was something raw, something elemental. Reeves looked round the ruined square, his gaze softening. We didn't win that day, but we didn't lose either, because every single person we bought time for, every child, every family, they're still alive, somewhere out there. That's victory enough. Vrother stood in silence, the cold air biting against his skin. He had fought alongside soldiers who were bred for war, creatures whose only purpose was battle, but they lacked this defiant, unbreakable spirit that turned engineers into demolition experts and farmers into living weapons. Finally, the alien warrior spoke, his voice low and steady. I have fought 100 battles, Captain Reeves. I have seen armies rise and fall, but never have I seen a people who fight with nothing left to lose, yet everything left to protect. Reeves met his eyes, a faint, tired smile on his lips. Then maybe you're starting to understand. The alien commander didn't answer, but deep inside, he knew something had changed. The galaxy might call humanity fragile, but to him, they were forged from something far stronger than steel. The sun had begun to set over Erebos 3, its pale light spilling through the ruins like liquid gold. The wind was quieter now, carrying only the distant sound of hammers, laughter, and the faint hum of generators. Commander Vrother stood beside Captain Reeves on a high platform overlooking the colony. From here, the destruction was clear. Whole districts reduced to rubble, streets scarred with craters, yet life moved below. Men and women worked side by side, repairing walls, hauling supplies, teaching children how to read by the glow of a salvaged lamp. In all his years of war, Vrother had never seen anything like it. On other worlds, survivors hid in fear after battle. Here, the humans didn't hide. They rebuilt, they laughed, they lived. You asked how we survived, Reeves said, breaking the silence. It wasn't because we were stronger than them. It wasn't because we had better weapons. It was because we refused to stop. Every time they knocked us down, we got back up. Every single time. Vrother's eyes followed a small group of children playing near the ruins of a burned-out tank. The tank's massive gun was now being used as a swing. The laughter that reached his ears was sharp and bright against the quiet evening. On my world, Vrother said slowly, war is fought for power, for territory, for pride. But your people, they fight for each other, even when there is no hope. Reeves nodded. That's the thing, Commander. For us, hope isn't something you have, it's something you make. Even if you have to build it out of ashes. The alien warrior let the words sink in. They were simple, but they struck deeper than any battle wound. He thought of the siege in the tunnels, the frozen moon, the last stand in the square, he thought. Of the farmer driving the explosives-laden hauler, the soldiers who marched into the storm knowing they would not return. None of it made sense from a tactical perspective, but it made perfect sense to the heart, and it shook him. He had faced warlords who crushed entire planets with ease, species whose technology could tear stars apart. Yet none of them had left him with this feeling, a mix of admiration, unease, and something dangerously close to fear. Finally, Vrotha spoke, his voice low and steady. Your enemies will never truly defeat you. Even if they destroy your cities, even if they burn your worlds, they will never kill what you are. Reeves didn't smile, but his eyes held a quiet fire. That's the point, Commander. That's why they fear us, though most of them don't realize it yet. Vrotha turned his gaze back to the horizon. The light was fading, and stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky. He felt the weight of what he had learned settle deep in his chest. When he returned to his people, he would report what he had seen. He would speak of the humans not as weak prey, not as fragile survivors, but as something far more dangerous. He would tell them the truth, and the truth was this: humanity could endure anything, as the last sliver of sunlight vanished. Vrotha whispered words meant only for himself. Never again will I underestimate humanity. Below, the colony kept moving, hammer strikes, children's laughter, the low hum of rebuilding. And in that sound, Vrotha heard the quiet drumbeat of a species that would not stop, not now, not ever.